Congress in 1968 as a memorial for Woodrow Wilson. My kind of funny line is instead of a statue for pigeons, created a think tank for foreign policy folks. We bring together both the policymaker, research, NGO, business spheres to explore all kinds of policy issues around the world in a nonpartisan, non-advocacy kind of way, just so you know. But our speakers can do whatever they want. Yeah, so the China Environment Forum's been around for a little over about 21 years, and I've directed it for 19 and a half-ish, I think. And yeah, so for those of you, a bunch of you in the room here, I know appear don't be China Environment Forum folks, so short advert. So we put on meetings and exchanges focused on a lot of energy and environmental issues in China. So I've done lots on, obviously, climate change, clean energy, air pollution, water pollution, but I did a meeting on cement. And so one time, about 10 years ago, I inched a little closer to the topic that Vince is going to talk to us about today. So I've never done sand until today. So we're doing it.
All right.
It's about time. So Vince Beiser, he's an award-winning journalist. He's based in Los Angeles. And, I mean, you guys have his bio, but I loved how you actually listed that you've been in over 100 countries, states, provinces, kingdoms, occupied territories, liberated areas, no-man lands, and disaster zones. So quick question, where was the sand reporting in all of those?
I think so. One emirate, one disaster zone. Yeah, probably, a good sample of all those.
And sand kind of makes you think of a no-man's zone. But he also, to be honest, he was also drinking champagne and eating nachos. On a yacht.
He was in the Emirates.
He was in the Emirates, so that kind of stuff happens. So, and so he can, and in the Q&A, you're more than welcome. I mean, when I was reading his bio, I kept asking him, like, wait, you wrote an article and it's being made by a feature film by Amazon. We can talk about that later, too. But we're here to talk about sand. That it's actually, here's the book, World in a Grain. And it's a story of the most important and overlooked commodity in the world. The only thing I'll say that's from the book is like that I honestly didn't know, that it is the most used commodity in the world. And it's no murder mystery. After water. So water and sand, you're thinking of the beach, but bring your blinds back here. Summer is over. We're talking about serious topics. So not only is it the second most used commodity, but it's actually running out, which is a statement that completely mystifies people, but you've set up the perfect storytelling opportunity because I've surprised people with the key fact here, and I'm done with my intro. I mean, I want you to talk. All right, so you want to come on up here? And so
Sure.
He's going to tell stories. I may ask a few questions, but your job, intrepid DC audience, is to ask more questions, and people on the webcast can put it on our Twitter, and we'll ask them questions from there. So come on up, Vince.
All right, thanks.
A little applause.
All right.
And so make sure you talk in the mic because we are on a webcast.
Okay. Hello, Internet. All right, well, thanks everybody for coming. And thanks to the Wilson Center for hosting us. And thank you, Jennifer, for your invaluable help with this and for the reporting and all the help you've given me along the way. Much appreciated. All right. So, indeed, I'm going to talk to you about what seems like the most boring thing in the world, sand. Why sand? Why so important? Because even though we hardly ever think about it, sand is actually the most important solid substance in the world. It's the literal foundation of modern civilization because it's the thing that modern cities are made out of, right? If you look around you right now, these walls, the floor beneath us, all those buildings outside, most of them anyway here in DC, they're made out of what? They're made out of concrete. Just like every apartment block, every office building, every shopping mall that gets built anywhere in the world today is made primarily of concrete. And what is concrete? Concrete is just sand and gravel that's been stuck together with cement. A lot of people mix up those terms. Cement is just the glue that binds together the sand and the gravel. All right? So, there we go. The roads that connect all those buildings, also made of sand, whether they're made out of concrete or asphalt. Asphalt is also just sand and gravel that's been stuck together. The windows in all those buildings, every piece of glass that you see around you, also made of sand.
Oh, no, it's plastic. Never.
Plastic. That's a whole nother story. That's next week. But every piece of glass, the computer screens, the glass in your eyeglasses, that's just melted down sand. The silicon chips that power your computers, your laptops, your phones, also made from sand. In fact, sand is with us in ways that you would never even imagine, that I had no idea about until I started doing this research. Sand is used to make paper. It's in your toothpaste. It's used to make cosmetics. It's used to make paint. It's used to make wine. The elastic that makes your underwear snap into place, also made from sand. Yeah, I love telling people that they have sand in their underwear. In short, no sand, no modern civilization. And guess what? We are starting to run out. How is that possible? Well, there's so much demand for sand today that riverbeds and beaches all around the world are being stripped bare, farmlands and forests are being torn up, and in some places there is so much demand for it that organized crime has actually gotten into the trade, and hundreds of people have been murdered over sand in the last few years. So, quick explainer, a lot of you actually probably know this stuff better than me, but just a quick background. What is sand anyway? So technically the word just means little bits of hard stuff, any like ground up rock. It's actually between 2 millimeters and 0.0625 millimeters in diameter if you really want to get super wonky, because I feel like it's that kind of
This is Washington, D.C. You just be wonky.
Okay.
Right.
So sand is made of lots of things. It can be ground up shells, right, which is where you get like those pink sand beaches in the Caribbean, or it can be ground up volcanic lava that's been ground up, which is where you get the black sand beaches in Hawaii. But most of it, and the stuff that we're worried about, is quartz grains. That's the stuff that we're really concerned about. And that's something like 70% of all sand grains in the world are quartz. We think. Nobody's actually counted, but that's our best guess. So what happened? Where does that sand come from? It's basically little pieces of mountains, little broken down bits of mountains. What happens is you got mountains and other rock formations that poke up, and over thousands, millions of years, they get worn away by wind and rain, and the elements are constantly breaking off little pieces. Those little pieces get washed down by landslides and by rain. They get taken up into rivers, and then the rivers basically carry them far and wide, all the way down to the places where they meet the sea, which is how you get sand on beaches and in floodplains. And over time, so there's a lot of sand winds up on the bottom of rivers, which we're going to talk about. And, over time, rivers change their courses, they flood, this and that, so you wind up with deposits of sand on the land. So that's basically where your sand comes from. So you've got lots of sand in the bottoms of rivers and lakes and on beaches, and also some sand in what has become dry land, all right? So we dig up that sand, we mine it all over the world on a titanic scale. We use nearly 50 billion tons of sand and gravel every single year. That's enough to more than cover the entire state of California. And as Jennifer said, way to step on my headline.
Yeah, sorry.
Yep, it's the most consumed natural resource in the world after air and water, if you count those. And the reason we need it is because we are building cities at a pace and on a scale that is way beyond anything that's ever happened before, right? In a nutshell, every year there's more and more people on the planet, and every year more and more of them are moving to cities, especially in the developing world, right? Just to give you, a few quick stats. In 1950, there was about 750 million people living in cities. Today, that number is about 4 billion and still growing by the millions every year. In fact, it's growing by about 65 million people a year. So we are adding the equivalent of 8 New York cities every single year to the world. Think about every building, every road that there is in New York City. We are building that many times 8 every year. And that's happening. So that kind of growth is happening all over the developing world, right? Indonesia, India, Vietnam, you name it. But way more in China than anywhere else, as is often the case when we're talking about China.
That's why he's here, okay?
Right? I brought it back around. I can see you starting to get a little tense there. But let me just get my little stats here.
Oh, yeah, I'll roll them down.
You were right. Didn't quite fit. So in China specifically, the number of people living in urban areas has more than tripled in the last 60 years. So there's more than 500 million Chinese people in China living in cities now. So that's more than the entire combined population of the United States, Canada, and Mexico, just in cities in China. And most of that, like I said, just in the last 50, 60 years. So that means that has made China into the most voracious consumer of sand in human history by far. They used, all by itself, China used, in 2016, 7.8 billion tons of construction sand. That's enough to blanket New York State. That's just China all by itself. And that number is growing. So I got that estimate in 2016. At that time, they were estimated to hit 10 billion tons in the next couple of years, so they're probably right around there by now. So that takes a lot of sand, right? How much sand? Well, a basic house, like your just standard American house, takes about 200 tons of concrete. And remember, that's mostly sand and gravel. That's just for a house, right? Something like a public building, like a hospital, about 3,000 tons. And just 1 mile of highway, 1 mile, takes about 15,000 tons of concrete. So imagine how much goes into building whole cities, right? With their highways, with all of their infrastructure and everything else. It uses so much concrete. We're now using, worldwide, we use enough concrete every year to build a wall right around the equator, 90 feet high, 90 feet across, every year. And China, this is my very favorite statistic, especially for China folks. China, all by itself, used more cement in 3 recent years, that's 2011 to 2013, than the United States used in the entire 20th century. Crazy, but true. So, I mean, just stop and think for a sec. Every dam, all the interstate highways, all the skyscrapers, every shopping mall built in America from 1900 to 2000, China used more concrete than that just in this decade alone. So this is how we can be running out of this stuff that's so incredibly abundant. All right. Whoops. Yeah. So how do we get that sand? It runs worldwide. It runs the whole spectrum. So in some places, multinational companies, great big organizations are dredging it up with enormous machines. These are dredges, which can be as tall as a 50-story building. These are some pictures I took on Lake Poyang in China, which I'll get back to in a minute. So it runs the gamut from that all the way down to just, industrious local folks, a couple of guys with a shovel and a pickup truck. This guy's in Kenya. And this, you can, find this kind of scene all over the world. Just, pickup trucks, mules, a couple of shovels. In a few places, this is the Thane River outside of Mumbai, where they actually haul it up by hand. What happens is, hello, pointer, there you are. Whoa. Guys dive down to the bottom of the river just with buckets, fill up the buckets, and then other guys on their boats pull it up by hand. So it's, literally from, buckets to dredges, it's about $130 billion industry worldwide. So people always say, well, what about desert sand, right? There's plenty of sand in those deserts. Problem is, all that desert sand, pretty much useless. Why? Because the grains are actually a different shape. Desert sand's been eroded by wind rather than water. And because of that, it winds up being more, the shape of the actual grains is much more rounded and smooth, and it doesn't lock together the way you need it to. That's desert sand over there. You see how it's kind of more rounded. This is sand, marine sand from the bottom of a river or something. You see how it's more angular. It's got all those corners, so it locks together. So it's like the difference between trying to build something out of a stack of marbles as opposed to a stack of bricks. It just doesn't lock together for you. Mm-hmm. So all that desert sand, forget about it. So we need the stuff that you get from the bottom, that's been on the bottom of rivers, on the bottom of lakes. So that is where we start to really run into problems. So when you dredge something, so here's a typical setup. You got a big dredge, and it just drops a pipe down to the bottom of the river or the lake and just sucks up, tens of thousands of tons of sand. So some pretty obvious problems with that, right? First of all, anything that was living on the bottom of that river is gone, right? Whatever vegetation, whatever, shellfish or whatever. Often river bottoms are spawning grounds, right? That's where fish like to leave their eggs. Well, goodbye eggs, right? All those eggs are now in the bottom of that boat. So that's one problem. Also, when you stir up the bottom like that, you stir up all that sand and the silt and the muck and whatever else was down there, and it clouds up the water for a long way away. So that can suffocate whatever was swimming around in that water. And also it blocks sunlight from getting down to whatever vegetation's in the bottom of that river. So it's a big problem in rivers. Also, we do mine sand from the ocean, from the bottom of the ocean, and a lot of coral reefs have been wiped out because of this, right? Because all the muck gets stirred up, it floats around, lands on top of the coral reef, smothers the coral reef. Goodbye, coral reef. So this is a big problem all around the world. There's been coral reefs, mangrove forests, seagrass beds, endangered species, huge numbers of fish, shellfish, birds, all kinds of things have been damaged, killed, wiped out by this kind of sand mining. And again, lots of it in China. So for instance, Shanghai is a great example of exploding urbanization. Another great little factoid. Shanghai, since the year 2000, has built more skyrises, more high-rises have been built in Shanghai since 2000 than there are in all of New York City. All right? That's a lot of sand. So they were getting it until through the 90s when the boom really took off. They were getting it from the bottom of the Yangtze River, right, which is a really important waterway in China. It's a source of drinking water for hundreds of millions of people, fisheries, et cetera, et cetera. Well, they realized that this was causing so much damage to the Yangtze. Riverbanks were collapsing, shipping was getting all messed up. The river was really, taking a serious hit. So the government has more or less banned sand mining on the Yangtze around 15 years ago. So all the sand miners shifted to Poyang Lake, which is this huge, enormous lake. It's the biggest freshwater lake in China. It's also a major winter destination for migratory birds. Something like 500,000 birds go through there every year. A lot of endangered species live there. You have freshwater porpoise and a kind of crane that I can't remember the name of off the top of my head, but take my word for it. So this place, Poyang Lake, that's the home to all these birds and all these endangered species, it is also the biggest sand mine in the world. These are all dredges, all these boats. And this is just one corner of the lake that I got to. There are hundreds of these boats out on the lake on any given day. So you can imagine this is not good news for the lake. In fact, not only is it endangering all the creatures that live in the lake and around the lake, but it's also, they believe, it's lowering the lake level because basically they've scooped out so much sand from the area where the lake drains into the Yangtze River that it's actually causing the lake level to drop, which is bad news for everyone around there. All right. So, since we're talking about China is also in the business. Oops, did I skip a slide there? Oh. So China is also, another thing that we use sand for is building artificial land, right? You guys have probably seen pictures of those crazy palm tree-shaped islands that they built in Dubai. Those are all sand. That's all sand that was scooped up off the bottom of the Persian Gulf and just piled up to form new real estate, right? So in places like Dubai and lots of other places, they do it to create new beachfront real estate, right? So you have billions of dollars of new coast where you can build hotels and resorts and luxury housing where there was nothing but open ocean before, right? So there's a bunch of problems associated with that. But the number one thing to worry about when we're talking about artificial land building is what China is doing in the Spratly Islands. You guys probably know more than I do about the Spratly Islands, but in a nutshell, just for those who don't, so the Spratly Islands was this little collection of rocks and reefs in a very strategic part of the South China Sea. There's billions of dollars of oil and gas underneath it. There's an enormous amount of fish that go through there, and some huge percentage of the world's shipping goes through there. It's super strategic little nexus. So all the countries around there kind of lay claim to it, or to bits and pieces of it. So what China did is they also took a bunch of these just rocks and coral reefs and built up, over the last 10, 20 years, they've built up the biggest dredging fleet in the world, right? And they used that dredging fleet to build artificial islands. They just this is actually pictures of it. You see all those little things that look like bugs? Those are dredges that are pulling up sand from the bottom of the ocean and shooting it through these pipes onto what was just a few rocks to create artificial land. Right, so they've pulled up millions of tons of sand from the bottom, dumped it on top of these rocks to create new islands where there was just ocean before. And then they turned those islands into military bases, right? Which now have, runways that can land nuclear bombers and port facilities that can host submarines. There's anti-aircraft missile batteries on them. So out of nowhere, just by using sand, China has created this huge strategic asset, and that has become a big-time flashpoint between China and the US and between China and all its neighbors. I won't talk too much about that because I'm betting there's people who know way more about it than I do.
No.
I don't want to put a foot wrong.
Well,
there.
I mean, we hear a lot of times about, China. I think you hear people saying like, well, they made the islands, the rocks bigger, and it's just, you kind of give us the image. And it's also this area also has got a lot of coral reefs and.
Right. So by the way, those coral reefs were all annihilated.
They're gone. Okay. Sorry, they're gone.
Yeah. There's one, it's been described as the biggest destruction of coral reefs ever. Because, you can imagine, you dump 10 million tons of sand on a coral reef, it's gone. All right. So just quickly, there's a lot of problems with how we get sand from rivers and lakes. We do get a lot of sand from the land, from terrestrial mines, as they're called. Interesting little piece of it is right here in the United States. Y'all know what fracking is, I assume, right? So to frack, to shatter that rock so you can get the oil out of it, you shoot down pressurized water and chemicals and sand. You need that sand to prop the cracks open. And you need a very specific kind of sand. It's got to be really hard and sort of just the right shape. Turns out there's a lot of just that kind of sand in western Wisconsin, of all places. There's no oil and gas in Wisconsin, but the fracking boom in North Dakota and in Texas has caused a frac sand mining boom in Wisconsin. They're digging up thousands of miles in forest and farmland to get at this sand that has become super valuable. You can kind of get a sense of it here. This is a frac sand mine that I visited in Wisconsin. Basically, all of it used to look like this, right? Trees and fields and stuff. And then they come in and they just rip off the topsoil and blast, just demolish everything that's underneath it and turn it into these big giant open pits.
Strip mining, it's like the old time coal mining.
Yeah, exactly. There's also beach sand mining. Yeah, we literally haul away beaches, or people literally haul away beaches. We were talking about this a little bit in the case of Haiti. We can talk about that in a sec if you want. But in a nutshell, beach sand, really easy to get. We've stopped doing it in this country. There used to be sand mines up and down the California coast. Those got phased out because they've realized of all the damage that it was causing. There is still one in operation just north of Monterey, which a lot of people are super upset about, including these adorable children who happen to be my children.
Aww.
Anyway, thanks for saying I could, show my advocacy.
You can. But this is part of the story.
It is part of the story.
It's like we have opinions. People have passions.
Absolutely. Anyway, there's been a lot of protests and demonstrations about that. And for once, the good guys won. This sand mine is going to be phased out. It's going to be shut down in about 2 more years. So there will no longer be any beach sand mining in the U.S., but there's still lots of it in other parts of the world. And in fact, in some places, it's gotten so bad that sand is being stolen, and not just in the developing world. Yes, the CEO of United Airlines stole sand from a local beach for his house. Come on, man. Sand, you got a $7 million house. You can't afford to just buy sand normally. So this is nothing. I like this because, it's right here in the United States. But around the world, things are much, much worse. In Jamaica, in Russia, and other places, thieves have stolen entire beaches, right? Like literally half-mile long stretches of sand that are just gone to be turned into hotels or to, whatever. In fact, there's a worldwide black market in sand, not just beach sand, but sand that's been stolen or illegally mined in all kinds of places. There's a little bit that happens here in the U.S. Usually people sort of going over their permit. Maybe you've got a permit to mine, a mile wide and 100 meters deep, and you accidentally go 2 miles wide and 200 meters deep. Oops, sorry about that. There was a big case that happened around this in San Francisco Bay. The famous San Francisco Bay is still being mined for sand. by a big international sand and gravel company. And they had to pay out about $42 million a few years back because they went way over their permitted amount. So that's sort of one extreme, this kind of gray market stuff. At the other extreme, you've got flat out criminal gangs, like I said before, dredging up tons of the stuff, selling it on the black market. This goes on all over the world. There's definitely some in China, bringing it back around to China.
Bring it.
You know, it's hard to, China's a hard place to really do investigative reporting around this kind of stuff, but there is definitely some happening. There's been illegal sand mining going on around Beijing for at least 10 years. I know because they've locked up, the sort of local authorities have made a show every couple of years of like rounding up illegal sand miners and locking them up. There was a gang that had this battle with knives at one point, different sand mining gangs fighting each other. There's illegal sand mining in the Chao River, which feeds the Mian Reservoir, which is the source of a lot of Beijing's drinking water. And there's a lot of concern about that, you know, because how it, you know, it stirs up all this silt and muck that then gets into the drinking water. So it's definitely happening in China. It's happening in dozens and dozens of other countries around the world. How do they get away with it? Well, they get away with it in most cases the same way that organized crime gets away with, you know, everything they do. They pay off cops, they pay off government officials, and if you really get in their way, they will kill you. In Kenya, in Gambia, in Indonesia, in a bunch of other countries, numerous people have been assaulted, have been beaten, have been murdered over sand. And the place that it's by far at its worst, the place that I started out on all this reporting is in India. In India, the body count is probably in the hundreds just in the last few years. This is how I got started. I was investigating this one particular murder that I can talk more about if you want. It's all in the book.
It's all in the book.
So they call them sand mafias. It's a big story in India. They call them the sand mafia, which sounds kind of funny, but it's actually really no joke. There's hundreds of these gangs. They've killed hundreds of people. And I'm talking about journalists, cops, government officials, ordinary folks who try to get in, who, you know, just try to stop them to prevent, you know, to just keep them from tearing up their local land. This guy here, this guy's a journalist. He's one of two journalists who were beaten bloody just last month investigating an illegal sand mine in Punjab. So it's really, really bad in India. So what can we do? This is the question we always get back to. There are some things we can do. And the bottom line is we're kind of stuck with sand, right? There's really no real alternative for it. But there are some things we can do. We can get smarter about how we harvest it, how we mine it. In a lot of European countries, for instance, they've banned river sand mining completely, right? In France, in Italy, they don't allow that at all because, you know, of all the damage that it causes. We still do river sand mining here in the US, by the way. Can we just make more? Yeah, we can. You can smash up rocks. You can take rocks and crush them down into sand. Two problems with that. You end up with the grains that you often get from that are not the best shape that you need for concrete. And also it's more expensive, right? You think about all the energy that it takes to smash up rock. It's a pretty expensive process. It's much cheaper to just, you know, scoop it up out of a river bottom. Can we recycle it? Yeah, sort of. We can to some extent. So we can recycle glass. That's good. But glass is like 10% of all our global sand usage. It's overwhelmingly concrete is what we're talking about. We can recycle concrete to a certain extent. Again, same problem. You crush up concrete. The sand you get is not the best quality. It's also more expensive than making fresh concrete. But the real problem with the idea of recycling concrete is you build something out of concrete. It's not like a newspaper or a bottle or something, right? It's not something that's meant to be just used once and then thrown away. You build something out of concrete. You want it to stay there for 50, 60, 100 years, right? So that sand is basically taken out of circulation, you know, for all intents and purposes permanently. So there is quite a lot of research going on around the world looking into ways to make concrete more efficient, to make concrete that uses less sand, or that uses things like alternative substances, shredded plastic or bamboo or hemp, actually. There's a lot of research going on around that. There's a few products that are on the market already. So, and all those things I think can help and do help, and more power to them. But the real bottom line to me, the only real solution is, first of all, we're sort of I'm asking the wrong question. The question isn't really, how can we use less sand? It's how can we use less of everything, right? Because sand is the most abundant thing on the planet. And if we're running out of that, which we are, that really tells us something, right? Because we know, you guys, this audience, I don't have to tell you, we're using too much fresh water. We're cutting down too many trees. We're taking too many fish out of the oceans. All these things that we used to think, all these resources that we used to think were basically inexhaustible, right? We didn't have to worry about them. We could use as much as we wanted. Well, we're learning, no, that's not the case. All of these things have limits, and we're having to get smarter about how we use them. We're having to figure out how to use less of them and use what we do use more efficiently. None of these things are infinite. So that's how we have to start thinking about sand in that same way. It's just, the problem isn't sand. Sand is just one more symptom of the overall problem, which is just that we are consuming too much, right? We're just, our whole way of life that's being adopted by the rest of the world is just flat out unsustainable. So the real, the real thing that I hope you take away is, don't worry about sand. Think about sand as a symptom of that larger problem. It's not about how can we, fix the problem with sand. It's about how can we figure out a way to build our cities and live our lives in a way that is sustainable for a planet that's soon going to have 10 billion people on it. So that's the bottom line. If you want to find out more, it just so happens I wrote a book on the subject, which you can get outside. I'll be signing copies if anybody wants that. And, by all means, be in touch. I'm sure all of you guys are involved in really interesting and important stuff. I'd love to hear from you. That's my website up there. It's got you can get my email and stuff there. You can get me through Twitter, all the usual stuff. Mm-hmm. And thanks for coming.
Yeah, all right. Go have a seat. This is great. I love storytelling. So again, got it. We're going to ask you questions. We won't give it all away, but start off with some questions. But one thing I want to say that in the book he is really a geek in terms both history geek.
You had to open with that?
Yes. Yeah. Well, no, but I loved how what's fascinating with this is just like a little bit of how we got here, like about how concrete was, how we came up with the idea of cement. That wasn't a thing back in the day, right? And so, but it was fascinating. And I guess, something that, where to start? So many questions. Well, maybe but with China, because you gave just a brief, there's a Chinese expression, the dragonfly dips into the water. So you just kind of dipped a little bit in the water on the sand issue there. Were there some other, you talked about Lake Poyang, were there other kind of hot spots of sand crises in China that you found?
I know, again, it's I don't speak Chinese, so I'm pretty limited. Other than the reporting that I did when I was there, everything that I know comes from what shows up in English language press. And I know there's been a bunch of, I've seen some stuff sort of here and there. There's another lake called Luoma. Mm-hmm. I forget exactly where it is, but that's same kind of thing, big problem there. Sort of every few months, something pops up about illegal sand mining here or serious environmental damage there. So it's widespread. It's really, I kind of focused on Lake Poyang because it's so...
It's the big story.
Yeah.
But what's and a lot of people who focus on China, and particularly if you focus on dam issues, and that, we know that there's been a lot of stories over the years how some, there's corruption in a lot of levels of construction. And one is the, because sometimes if you're having difficulty getting the right kind of sand, and you can learn so many things about, it's like a boutique industry. Specific types of sand for different types of products. But for the construction, that sometimes people, do it on the cheap. Either they don't put enough sand or they don't have the right kind of sand. And so you end up with what you I loved it that you did use the phrase tofu cement, but it's scary though, because in the Sichuan earthquake, notably a lot of schools collapsed. The government buildings didn't, but the schools collapsed, and it kind of came out that a lot of the contractors were cutting corners.
Right, and we were talking before about the same thing happened in Haiti. That's one of the reasons the big earthquake in Haiti in 2010 was so devastating, was because a lot of the concrete that they used was really substandard.
But so like in the construction industry, like, you know, I'm going to leap ahead. I'm just going to ask 2 more questions, then you guys get ready, okay? That like in the construction industry in China, a couple months ago, we had a guy from it's a foundation called it's the Society for Entrepreneurs and Ecology, and they've created. Unfortunately, I didn't know him before you went to China, or I would have introduced you. But so they've actually come up with a certification system, and I'm actually going to get a hold of him so he can know more about the sand issue. But they've created a certification system to try to green the supply chain for building materials. Now, their big focus is on pollution and CO2 emissions, and cement has been a big focus of it. And so that's when I'm thinking of solutions. That's the first thing that popped in my mind, because if the buildings are the problem, well, what about the supply chain? And now, but see, you're stretching the supply chain, you know, long way down the beach, right?
Yeah.
And which makes it tougher, but not impossible.
Right. No, it's doable. I think that's a really good idea. I mentioned it in the book, like something like, you know, the Forest Stewardship Council. There's these like, you know, certified. There's no reason you can't have that for sand mining. Have somebody go in and certify that it's done, you know, without too much environmental damage and without putting fishermen out of work and all that good stuff.
But the challenge, you know, but we've also had people at the China Environment Forum talking about like clothes, like that's also another supply chain that can be highly polluting in China. But the problem is that, you know, my dress suit or the underwear, as you were talking about earlier, I mean, somehow we can, as consumers, we can grab onto that because we're wearing it. But my foundation of my building and my roads. I mean, I guess I'm trying to think, my big question is, and then we'll open up, and I'm also asking this to you guys as well, is that like, where your book touched on it, but where do you think are going to be the most important key points for, you know, engaging on how to make sand sustainable? Because like the consumer level, I mean, you know, with glass, I see it. Cement, I see it kind of harder. There's environmental groups, businesses. Do we need is there some kind of, do you think some kind of global environmental, you know, we've got the biodiversity, we've got the climate change, because sand, you know, like it gets in your teeth and your underwear, sand, you can see how it could maybe slip its way into all different kinds of kind of international laws that are coming out. Like, I mean, law of the sea. I don't know. What do you think there, Vince?
I think, yeah.
But again, so I mean, but again, I'm not criticizing it, because it's like the fact that you wrote this book and have put it out there on the agenda and that you're giving all these talks, and I'm hoping that in the China Environment Forum that, you know, I want to start conversations like this in China, so you need this in Chinese. Come on, good market there for you.
Fine by me.
Just make sure the paper.
Anybody who's got contacts in the Chinese publishing industry, you know where to find me.
Or it may be pirated before we know it, right? But is this? I mean, is this kind of as you're talking? I mean, are you trying to, you know, drum up some support? Or
yeah, for sure. I mean, it's really one of the things that keeps blowing my mind about this issue is just how few people know about it and how few people are, you know, active around it. And that's starting to change. I mean, it's definitely, you know, getting more attention in the media, and other groups are picking it up. Like the only major international NGO that I know of that's really working on it is the World Wildlife Fund. And they just came out last week with if you're really interested in this, they just came out with an excellent report that kind of summarizes a lot of the available scientific data on this, because there's also very little research on this. Like all the stuff I was telling you about, you know, the environmental impacts, this and that, it's super piecemeal, right? Like, just like maybe there's a guy in Alabama who did a study about his local river, and there's a guy in Ghana who did a thing on his. There's no, like, it's really scattered. It's really scattershot. There's no
sand.
Like sand itself. So this WWF report is the first one that really tries to compile all that and kind of summarize it and put it all in one place, which is super helpful. They've been really active. They got into the issue. It's really mostly their Asian branch that's interested in it because of what's happening to the Mekong Delta. So in a nutshell, the Mekong Delta is disappearing, right? This incredibly important river delta that supplies something like half the rice for all of Southeast Asia, and like it's an incredibly important food source for that whole region. It is literally shrinking year by year. And a big part of that is sea level rise, but a big part of it is because the Mekong the delta gets replenished by the Mekong River, right? What normally happens is, the delta is constantly being eroded by the ocean. The ocean's, shifting, washing silt and sand and grains out to sea, but it gets replenished by new stuff being brought in by the river. But now the river, first of all, there's so many dams along the Mekong.
There's the China thing again.
There's the China thing again, but also Laos and all the countries that it goes through, Cambodia. So dams, number one. And number two, sand mining. All along the Mekong, there's sand miners pulling sand out to build all those skyscrapers in Cambodia and Vietnam and everywhere else. And that, as a result, then the amount of sediment, the amount of sand and everything else that gets down to the delta has gone. So that's the WWF has sort of picked up on that as an issue that they're kind of trying to raise the alarm about.
But that raised the issue that not just in the Mekong, but another, and in the books, the stories in his book also talks about how that with the dredging, how it has an impact on human health and livelihood issues. I mean, the fishers in the delta and the inability to fish because you've destroyed all the fish. Want to note too that, so we tried to get WWF and they were it's their Asia Bureau and they were just in Stockholm World Water Week. So we want to have WWF at the table. We'll get them later. Also the Human Rights Watch has got some folks that do work in several countries in Africa that are looking at human rights abuses that are linked to the sand mafias there. So but it was really striking to me because I was like, when I first invited him, like, I'll get you a panel. I'm like, no panel. But it's okay because he's a one-man show. It works. But that is also very telling.
It's a two-person show.
It's
Don't sell yourself short.
Show. Yeah, it's a duet. So no, but this is good. So I'm hoping that we can, with the environmental change security program here, and we've got other regional programs that I want to dig into this topic and try to find out how, at the Wilson Center, how we can kind of raise the awareness and get conversations going. Because the Wilson Center, we're all about, I'm all about solution stuff. It's gloom and doom, but of course, China being number one. I guess I'm on the agenda here. All right, let's open up for some questions from you guys. I'll still keep asking him questions. He could take it about any, you can even ask questions about the India stuff, whatever. James will go first because James likes going first. James? Right, no, back there.
Two detailed.
Oh, and make sure you say your name.
Jim Sang, retired. Two detailed questions. One, sand is normally thought of as a local commodity. It's very heavy and expensive to ship. To what extent is your problem a local problem rather than a countrywide problem? I.e., is this really a problem in Western China, for example, versus around within 50 miles of Shanghai? And two, you pointed out roads are a major consumer of construction material. But there is the option of using asphalt. It's my impression that asphalt has a lot less sand. You can use sand to make it flow easily, but you don't want your roads to flow easily. So you usually use much more gravel. It's only a different size thing. So how much difference is there between using asphalt and concrete and roads for sand use?
So on the first question, not really. It's kind of a distinction without a difference. Gravel. The difference between gravel and sand is just the size of the chunks, right? For the most part, you get gravel from the same place you get sand. So sometimes when I'm talking about sand mining, it's really sand and gravel mining. In the industry, they just call it aggregate, both those things together.
Wait, get the mic, because we're on webcast, sorry.
Is the asphalt aggregate much larger than the sand particles you like to use in a building?
That could be. You're probably right. I don't know about that particular detail, but again, it's coming from the same or really similar sources, right? You get gravel from a lot of the same places. Usually you get them both together. So a lot of the damage that I'm talking about, a lot of the problems that come from sand mining, it's really aggregate mining. It's sand and gravel. So, I mean, at the end of the day, asphalt is just sand and gravel stuck together with asphalt as opposed to cement. So I don't know that switching to using more asphalt, I don't know if that would really make much of a difference. Maybe.
Does asphalt, I mean, I don't know. I'm unclear. I have potholes everywhere in Kensington, but is asphalt or cement, it really depends how it's made, right?
Well, the difference basically is, so there's concrete is the gray stuff, and asphalt is the black stuff, and both of them are just sand and gravel that have been glued together. The difference is the binding agent, the glue. So in concrete, it's cement. Cement's just a really fine powder. You mix it in and it hardens, it cures, and turns into concrete. With asphalt, the asphalt itself is actually the binding agent. It's bitumen. It's a different thing. It's a different chemical compound, but it does the same thing. It just glues all that stuff together into a hard surface. It's got, different properties. It's a little more malleable. It's more easily recycled. But basically, it's just, imagine it as it's the same stuff, but just different glue holding it together.
But we don't necessarily yet have the science to, because I'm thinking like the policymakers, like, in a city that's, in California, we want to be better with if we're concerned about sand, like, what do we choose? It's like the paper bag or plastic with the grocery store. We don't really.
Yeah, I think from looking at from the standpoint of sand and gravel, I don't think it makes much difference.
Okay.
You might be right that there's more gravel in asphalt, and therefore you can get it from different places. Maybe. I suspect it's pretty much a wash. But as to your first question, sand, you're exactly right. Sand, one of the big problems with sand is that it's really heavy. A cubic yard of sand weighs more than a ton. So as soon as you have to transport it more than a few miles, the price starts to go up really, really high. So mainly, where it's the problems, all these problems that I've been talking about are at their worst is near cities, right? That's where there's huge pressure on whatever sand sources there are near these booming cities. But the problem is there are so many cities. Cities are just growing like crazy all over the place. So it is kind of localized in the sense that it tends to be worst around cities, but there are so many cities by now that makes the problem really widespread.
But the coastal cities, that you talk about the ocean dredging, which is, the boats can just come right up to the port and unload their sand. And the ocean's not local. A question for the ocean dredging, your little pipes to suck it up can only be so long. Is it mainly close to the coast then as well?
Yeah, because you can only go down so far. The boats are getting bigger and more powerful all the time, so they can go further and further, but yeah, you can only go to a certain depth. So this is why, for instance, there's a whole another thing about beaches that I didn't talk about, but it's in the book. Nutshell, beaches are disappearing all over the world, just like the Mekong Delta, because they're being eroded by natural processes, but but we're blocking the flow of replenishing sand because of dams on rivers and also because of infrastructure on the coast blocks sand coming down. So in a lot of places, like in southern Florida, Miami Beach, Fort Lauderdale, some of the most famous beaches in America, these beaches are completely disappearing. They've been replacing that sand, renourishing it, they call it, by sucking up sand from the bottom of the ocean and blasting it onto the beach. By now, they have completely run out of sand. They've used up all the sand they can get from the bottom of the ocean, and they have to bring it in by truck now.
It's great. This is like headache infrastructure stuff. Okay, let's bounce back from one side. Well, the woman she got her local library to stock your book.
Oh, thanks.
Aww.
I'm one of those.
And your name?
Joyce Namde. I'm retired from the Department of State. I'm one of those people who's trying to consume less. So I got the library to buy the book, and I brought the library's book for you to sign.
Fair enough.
So,
can I sign a library book? Isn't that
I
vandalism?
know. I'm taking a risk. I'm going out on a limb and hoping they'll be happy with that.
Or you could just drop it in the return
bin. I'll drop it in the bin, and they'll be like, "Who wrote in the book?"
The author.
But one thing that I read in the book that I've been thinking about is there's been a lot of talk about the infrastructure in the United States. And let's face it, our infrastructure, a lot of it is getting very old, particularly dams and bridges, which are a big consumer of concrete. So do you have recommendations, or where do you see us going in the next, say, decade, when we are going to have to seriously deal with, what can we do to deal with the fact that we have to repair and replace our own infrastructure to make that a better process, or a more environmentally friendly and sustainable process?
So this is I think this gets back to what I was saying of like, it's kind of a mistake to just think about like sand, how can we, let's focus on sand and how can we consume less sand, when really the issue is how can we consume less of everything. And when you think about it, if you can reduce consumption in one area, often that means that sort of has these ripple effects, right? Like if you, for instance, more bikes, fewer cars, right? If we could replace 10% of passenger cars in this country with bicycles instead, that would mean 10% fewer houses that would need garages and driveways, right? So just think of all the sand that goes into paving that driveway and building the garage. You wouldn't need those if you didn't have a car, right? And all the fewer roads, fewer parking lots, all that. So just by making that, that one change, which of course has all kinds of other benefits if we have more bicycles and so on, that also could have a major knock-on effect in reducing the amount of sand that we use. So when we talking about infrastructure, I think that's one way to really think about it, is like what are, these sort of, what other kinds of changes can we make that would reduce our need for infrastructure across the board? You know what I mean? Rather than only thinking, well, how can we replace all those bridges? I mean, this doesn't so much apply to bridges and dams, but instead of thinking so much about, well, how are we going to fix all the interstates and all the roads that need fixing, maybe we can actually get rid of some of those roads. Maybe we can slim some of those roads down, turn them into bike paths.
Well, think about even like because we've had a lot of meetings on dams over the years, bringing U.S. and Chinese folks together, and it's always been interesting when the Chinese come and they meet folks in the U.S. and they find out that we're taking down a lot of our dams, right? I mean, for some ecological reasons, also for safety reasons, or just, coming up with ways like, hey, actually, if we save more water, or if we don't need the hydropower, we'll use renewables. But you also noted in here about the you call it, shared, Uber and Lyft and these things where there's, I don't know, can we call them millennials? I mean, like a lot of times people say like, yo, yonder, are you a millennial, Jill?
I don't like being pegged as a millennial.
Oh, well, but you don't have a car, right?
Correct.
And a lot of your generation,
Lyft.
you guys don't have cars.
Yeah.
And it's just because.
Bikes.
That's true. Yep.
All right.
There's a lot, but it's some people said that there is a potential trend.
Yeah.
But there's also, and from the policy side of me says that, well, there needs to be ways to encourage people. I mean, like DC, bless DC, all these bike paths that we're getting in town here. We're kind of getting a metro system that's functioning again, right? I mean, so those are ways. Because, I mean, ultimately, we do have these people, and we do need to move them.
Yeah, absolutely. But we don't need for every single person to own, their own giant vehicle that just sits parked 90% of the time, right? So yeah, that's another thing. Like, I mean, if instead of, people still need cars, obviously, but if we can reduce, the number of people who own cars by 10% or 15%, that reduces demand for all kinds of other things. And even Airbnb, right? Things like, if you can stay in somebody's private home instead of in a hotel room, if we can, reduce demand for hotels by 10%, well, it's bad news for the hotel industry, but it means that we, have that many fewer hotels that we need to build, that many fewer parking lots. And parking lots drive me crazy. Like, of all the ridiculous things to use space and resources on. The place to leave a car,
What was that song? Put up a parking lot.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So there's some other questions. Okay, I'm moving back to this side now. So we'll get that gentleman there. We'll gather two questions, here and here. So Jill, you come up front to give hers. So we'll ask you first, sir.
Thank you. Yes, Sullivan Gassman. You mentioned the challenge of getting more people to care about this issue, take it seriously. And I imagine one of the biggest obstacles to getting people to understand the gravity of the situation is just when someone hears sand shortage, they're probably thinking, oh, isn't like half the continent of Africa covered in that stuff? But you were able to visually show us the difference between desert sand and river sand. So I guess I would just want to ask, what do you think is the best way to clarify to a layman the difference between desert sand and river sand? Or should we not be saying just sand shortage? Should we be emphasizing river sand, or is there like a specific term for that?
I just, the nutshell is the grains are too round. And I always use,
Put the picture up.
there it is.
There it is.
And, my little sound bite is it's like trying to stack up a bunch of marbles as opposed to a stack of little bricks.
Yeah, but it was also, but again, I've been thinking about how, like, okay, climate change, the science came through, and even though it is also, I mean, it's everywhere, it's a bit, it's a bit amorphous. It was a hard sell for people to kind of get it, but you kind of think, I mean, the challenge with this is that, I mean, it's a different but similar challenge that this is everywhere.
Yeah,
But the concept, it's a little simpler though than climate change.
that one is.
This one is. I mean, yeah. So it's like, get the
Round versus square. That one's easy.
Right. Have your child try to stack the marbles. But again, there's the issue that, as he noted, though, is that, I mean, WWF, I will, drag them in here to when they get recovered from, well, I'll try to bring someone in from Asia because it sounds like it's the Asia team, but get them to come in and talk and to get more conversations going because the awareness has to be built that way.
Definitely.
Okay, and you up here, and then you had a question too, right, sir? Okay, yeah. So you'll be third.
So,
Yeah.
Linda Higueras, SICE grad, actually visiting from San Francisco.
Hey, welcome. Protect your bay.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's funny you should mention Africa. My question was, with the Chinese garnering all these huge construction projects in Africa, are they then dredging locally to supply the building materials that
Yes.
they need? Okay.
Yeah.
Because
And-
you were commenting how expensive it would be for them to be bringing it from China.
Right. Yeah, no, you pretty much always, 95% of the time, any major, like you always want to get the sand from somewhere locally because otherwise it's really expensive. And I know for sure in Kenya, at least, there's been a lot of controversy over, there's a Chinese-funded road that they're building from Nairobi to Mombasa, for which they were dredging a lot of sand, and people were really concerned about the impact that was having and whether they were, basically wrecking local fisheries and stuff like that. I know about that in Kenya. I'm sure that there's similar stuff happening in other parts of Africa.
Well, actually, when you say that, because that's one of the areas where the China Environment Forum is going to be doing more meetings and investigation over the next couple of years is the Belt and Road initiatives for China, their overseas investments. And Kimberly, one of my summer interns here, she's actually doing her senior thesis on cement. It's all your fault.
Sorry.
But do we have a number on? We know that there's anecdotally we're seeing, you hear about the Chinese. They're building about 40 ports around along those belts and roads. They're building dams, they're building infrastructure, but they're also you start Googling it, there are all these photos of Chinese officials and whatever local country it is standing there with big ribbons with a cement plant. So the Chinese are bringing the cement building technologies there as well. And the question in your thesis is going to be, how green is this, right? Do you have any numbers on how many cement plants? And you need a microphone. You need a microphone. Nope.
When you think about places that need the most infrastructure like Latin America or Africa, that requires a lot of cement to build the dams and ports and expressways. But these projects are still underway. So
Yeah, but the fact that they're bringing, and also they sometimes even bring in Chinese workers to build and run the cement plant. So it's again, partially your fault too that, in some of my Belt and Road research that we want to start looking at cement. So that it's a big push. And this gentleman here.
Thanks, Vince. I'm Eagles Milbergs. I'm a co-founder of a organization, nonprofit in Seattle that deals in water technology and water innovation. Following up on an earlier comment about where we go with infrastructure, I'm wondering what your views are about how to create a global innovation initiative that might start addressing this overall question. I think you're touching on kind of the notions of a circular economy in terms of how it might function. And, in the area of urban built environment, lots of opportunities in things like laminated timber as an alternative, let's say, to concrete and composite materials, and building bridges or whatever, and reducing, parking lots. That's great. Less need for physical transportation infrastructure. But the question I have is, what's the appetite, do you think, between China, the U.S., the rest of the world, to get at a solution, a roadmap ahead? Just be interested in your opinion on that.
So a roadmap for basically
innovating and addressing the problem that you've defined, which is to obviously use less sand and have less impact on the environment, etc.
Yeah.
How do we get beyond the problem,
Right.
gnawing on the problem, start gnawing on the solution?
Yeah, it's a great question. So like I said, there's already quite a bit of research going on. People looking into especially around concrete, ways to make concrete more efficiently, ways to make concrete that'll last longer, ways to make concrete self-healing, if you can believe that. Concrete.
Oh my God, that was my
Isn't
favorite
that
part.
crazy?
Sorry.
You're gonna have
Gave
to
it
read
away.
the book for that one.
Self-healing cement, people. Come
That's
on.
right. So there's a certain amount of activity around it. I think, like I say, first of all, I mean, this particular issue is just like, it's still like so few people even know about it, or, to let alone worry about it. And also, you always run into the problem of business, really, right? The construction industry is huge, and using the reason that we use sand and the reason we use concrete is they're really cheap and they're really effective. It's a great building material, right? You can make it pretty much anywhere in the world, pretty much any country in the world. It's incredibly flexible. It's really cheap. It's really easy to make. So you sort of, you run up against that of just like the market imperative of by far the cheapest and easiest thing to do is to scoop sand out of a river and make it into concrete. So to come up with any kind of real like overall solution, we need to deal with that, right? I mean, this is the problem with a lot of of our sustainable solutions for lots of things, right? There are alternatives there's alternative energy sources, there's alternatives for this and that, but very often they're more expensive, so they don't get used, right? That's what held back solar for so long. It was just more expensive. And at the end of the day, that's what motivates most people, right? Is how they can do something cheaper.
Well, in terms of the research that you found, I mean, because research, I mean, there could be basic scientific research, those PhD students at universities. And I mean, is it basic research that's going on that's happening? Is it?
It's both.
It's
both.
Companies that are trying to figure that, there's far-sighted companies who maybe see the writing on the wall, the writing in the sand that's blowing away. But, because I'm trying to think,
Sure.
should you go talk to NSF, the Ministry of Science and Technology, to get them to throw some money after these kinds of research?
So there's both things going on. There's both, real laboratory basic science going on. There's a thing called the Concrete Sustainability Initiative that's affiliated with MIT. There's a few think tanks like that, and there are also businesses, corporations that are doing it, that are coming up. Like there's a company in Denmark that got in touch with me saying that they've got a process by which you can use desert sand to make concrete. I don't know if it works or not, but they're trying to bring that to market. There's an outfit that makes hempcrete. It somehow uses the hemp plant to make concrete. My father-in-law, Jed Schilling, will tell you there are companies that are looking into compressed earth. Where you basically just take dirt and compress it down, and you can use that as an alternative building material. Somebody mentioned laminated wood, which I've heard works pretty well as an alternative. So there are actual products that are already on the market. But so
the
far,
plastic one interested me because let's bring two of my worlds together: plastic waste.
Yeah, wouldn't
China's
that be
not taking
great?
anymore? And but do you know what kind of plastic it is?
I don't really know much about it. I know it's researchers in India. I can dig up the details
Yeah, I'd like
if
to.
you really want.
Because that's how it has to be. That you have to get the right folks to start having these conversations.
Yeah.
Okay. Some other questions. So we got Oh, he's got the mic. Dang. Okay, go. You're next, and then
Well,
after him. No, you're fine.
Vince just beat to me because I am his father-in-law. And
All
have the
right.
honor, and have read the book, which is excellent, and was going to comment.
In your unbiased opinion.
Yeah.
Graduate of MIT and former economic advisor to the King of Morocco, too. So
Yeah. But just I was following up on a couple of the alternative things. One of which you mentioned was the compressed earth brick, which uses the earth you dig out of the foundation to make the bricks to build the house, and it saves energy and a number of other things. And the other thing that could come up is what Japan has done is limit the size of housing. If China did something like that and stopped them going, it would reduce the demand, the growth in demand for the sand and the concrete, because their houses are now getting big like our houses, not staying smaller like the Japanese houses. So that's another alternative to follow up on, and office space and lots of other things, because some of these things are just so huge, and maybe a major tax on sand use or something like that would give the right encouragement to the construction sector.
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
Okay, right up front here. Here we go. And after him, who else has a question? Okay, we'll start moving the back. You can put him. So we'll gather 2 questions, and then you answer. Okay, go ahead and say who you are.
Right. Yeah, thank you for the great talk. My name's Brian. I'm just finishing up with NRDC in Beijing. And yeah, it was great to hear about all, the environmental, economic, health costs of, sand mining. But so when you're talking about a shortage, though, is this something that's being reflected? Is there any kind of price signal for that? I mean, is this becoming an issue with, construction input costs? Because hearing about
Yes.
compressed earth or something.
Yeah, so the price of sand in this country has quintupled in the last 30 years. So it's still, it's still quite cheap, but it's gone way, way up. And I've got to think that that's one of the reasons that the price of housing has gone up so much in all our big cities. So, and worldwide, it's also gone up. I don't know the exact number, but.
And you notice that because we actually have rules and regulations that are in general being enforced. I mean, you mentioned gray markets here, but you said that California and a number of other states are just not, they have to import their sand from the Canadians?
So there is, yeah,
So
that's how bad things
Maybe
are.
not for much longer. We got.
That's right. NAFTA.
Or there'll be tariffs on it. Yeah, it's like, but no, it's true. I mean, but you have to just think how heavy this is. Okay, continue.
Sorry, just a really quick follow-up.
Please do.
Hearing about these alternatives, just, you're talking about the price of sand rising, just kind of a ballpark idea. What's the price difference right now between, using sand for some kind of construction versus, a more innovative, environmentally friendly approach?
Oh, I couldn't tell you.
I think that the part of the challenge is that there are these alternatives, but I don't think very many of them are up to commercial scale yet. I mean but it's yeah. I mean, it makes you makes you think a little bit about the solar panels. Oh, he's back again. Here we go. Oh, we need a mic. It's on webcam. There we go.
Just to answer the question about compressed earth bricks, there have been some major studies done, and the construction cost is 10 to 30% less than the cement bricks and concrete bricks and things like that. And it has a much higher insulation capacity, so the heating and cooling bills are lower for the building user. So that's been that's been studied and demonstrated.
But it sounds like that I mean, so this kind of conversation and NRDC, let's think about this. That a lot of this has to the whole kind of back to the certification and the standards for buildings, but it also would entail. I mean, I know that for some reason it leaps in my mind Hong Kong first, but I think it's true in China. A lot of times though, like when you build a building, the developer who builds it is not the one who's going to run it later. And so the idea is like, how do you link in those incentives? I mean, the certification system that a whole bunch of real estate, it was originated by these real estate companies in China to green the building supply chains. I mean, it's super innovative, and I'm really feeling optimistic about it. But so trying to actually create, pressure for other real estate, people who build the buildings to get something cleaner and greener. But right now they're mainly focused again on pollution and CO2, and the fact that if the science is still relatively new, And, and you need numbers. Like, well, how do we decide, how do we benchmark these materials? But it sounds like there's some work out there that could be done by some people. Any more comments? Do you have okay, where were we moving? We're moving back to the back.
My name is Josh Liu. I'm a staff attorney at the Environmental Law Institute. And part of our work is to follow environmental compliance and enforcement in China closely. And we have noticed that illegal sand mining has been a focus of criminal crackdown in China. So nowadays, if you illegally mine sand worth of $8,000, that can qualify a person to go to prison. But sending people to prison will not save the habitat in lakes, rivers, and oceans damaged by illegal sand mining. So my question is, during your investigation around the world, have you ever seen some good practices on repairing the habitat damaged by sand mining? So, thank you.
Sure. Yeah. So in this country and in most other developed countries, at least for terrestrial sand mines, for like those big pits that I showed you in Wisconsin, companies are usually required to do some restoration. And I didn't really go deep into that, into how effective it is. There's definitely controversy. A lot of folks think it's not enough, and they don't get held to account, and the degree that they have to restore the land to isn't sufficient in any way. You can never fully restore it. So, I mean, I know that there is like established practice around them. There are established standards. I didn't really go deep into that stuff. So as far as I got was, it's controversial.
But there would be, you have to think in the U.S., like in West Virginia, like how a lot of coal mining areas out in Montana, maybe Montana is a better example, where there are standards that have been made and some successes, but it really kind of depends. But I mean, you're never going to get it back to the original.
Right.
Okay, some other questions? We had a little corner. Okay. Move along the back, I guess.
Howdy, Scott Wilson. I'm former director of the International Human-Powered Vehicle Association. We're a record-keeping body for human-powered records worldwide.
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned the advantages of having more people on bikes and other smaller vehicles. I would encourage you to follow the World Human-Powered Speed Challenge in Battle Mountain, Nevada next week. People come from around the world to set land speed records on bicycles and tricycles on flat ground, Nevada 305.
Cool.
5 miles to accelerate, a 200-meter trap, and a mile to slow down.
Wow.
I'll tell you, the world's record is 89.59 miles per hour.
Wow.
Whoa.
Now, at higher altitudes, which is what northern Nevada is, there's less air drag. But if you shape your bicycle like a bullet, which is a commercially available vehicle in Europe and Canada and now some in America, you can get a great deal of utility on strictly human power. If you add a little electric assist, there's absolutely no need for a car for 95 or more % of everything that we do.
Yeah, well, and think about the explosion of the dockless bike. The dockless bike experiment appeared to have died in D.C. from what we understand, that D.C. said they wouldn't allow enough of them in. But a lot of other cities, we still have Capital Bike Share, which is a docked bike system, and you've seen a lot more bike riding here in D.C.
A great deal more. And of course, part of that is you build the infrastructure, and people who were afraid to ride with traffic will ride separated from traffic. And all those short trips, but I'm talking major trips. I mean, it's amazing what's possible.
That's cool.
And with a little electric assist, everybody's on board.
Well, I'm totally going to, we have to make sure we tweet that out on our social media. Thank you so much.
So it's the World Human Powered Speed Challenge, Battle Mountain, Nevada. I follow it on recumbents.com. I'll be there, but
all right.
If you want to follow it,
we'll look for your beard flowing in the wind.
What's your personal record?
Oh, I am not a participant. I help run it.
Okay.
I would love to participate. My guess is, based on the people I've crewed for, that I could hit at least 60. We had a 72-year-old riding a 20-year-old velomobile, which there's another competition. The ASME competition is for a utility vehicle. And so you got to carry a couple of bags of groceries. You got to be able to ride around in parking lots. They have 3 competitions a year, East Coast, West Coast, and the rest of the world, I think it is. But if you follow that as well, you'll see the amount one of their components of measuring in their competition is speed.
Mm-hmm.
So they are built to have some level of speed. So this 72-year-old riding this 20-year-old velomobile hit 49 miles an hour.
Wow.
And his comment was, I'm used to a cadence of 130. The bike was not built to go any faster than 49. Nobody can pedal with any efficiency faster than 130. So
It's cool.
he
I
could
like
go
it.
faster in a different vehicle.
Yep.
Anyhow,
I'm
Yeah.
going to get you next.
if we can get that level of efficiency in our transportation, it totally changes the need for infrastructure.
Agreed.
And it'd be a huge, huge change.
That's good. Yeah. That's exciting to hear. All right. So we have a mic there, and then we'll go to the back row, and then up to you, ma'am. Okay?
Hi, thank you for the great talk. My name is Daniel Kim. My question is probably related to Josh's question before. How do regulations and laws might differ among countries that you might have looked at doing your research in terms of sand mining? Difference between United States and China. You mentioned about India too, Indonesia. So,
I mean,
Right.
are we the best? Can we say we're the best?
No.
No.
Can we ever anymore?
Come on,
I mean,
we
really.
can. We are.
So they vary a lot, and the range goes from pretty thoroughgoing regulations to absolutely none at all, and that's not just worldwide. That's also here in the United States. It's something that until pretty recently most people just never even worried about. So, for instance, in all of Texas, there were 0 regulations about sand mining until 2009.
Whoa.
Yeah. And New York State, only in the 70s did they start regulating it. And so at the moment here in the States, a lot of it happens at the local level. It's counties or states that regulate, how much you can mine, where you can mine it. And often there's no rules like specifically saying sand miners, you can do this, you can do that. It's more like, there'll be a law saying, there can't be any commercial activity, and, it's something that sort of ends up covering sand mining. So it's really piecemeal. It's really uneven is the point I'm trying to make.
But interrupt you. So at the national level, there's no
like actual law about sand mining at the federal level. There are some pieces of federal legislation that kind of affect it. Like there's the Waters of the United States law that can, has some bearing on, where you can mine sand, how you can mine sand, basically, depending on its impact on the waterway. But that's not a rule that's specifically aimed at sand mining. It just.
But would this be, I'm also thinking like, where's the home for this type of, is it the EPA? Is it you can imagine also the Park Service. Where administratively, where would this find its home?
That's a good question.
It'd probably be under Zinke's watch, right? Yeah. Corps of Engineers. Yeah. The Army Corps of Engineers. Okay, can you say that again, please, for the?
Well, as far as I remember, the Corps of Engineers is the only responsible agency for dredging and that kind of in public waterways. But private sector, it's a local permitting process. For instance, on the Mississippi River, if you want to put a dock out, and you have to do some dredging or some. It's related to construction, as you're saying, only indirectly. It's not specifically a mining, because we have, if you look at our mining laws, they're from 1870.
That was a while ago.
Yeah, right.
All right. So mind the gap. We have gaps legally in the U.S. Tell
Right.
us more. Where's it good?
So
Or
so
worse.
there's two issues, right? There's what are the laws and do the laws get enforced? So in India, for instance, in a lot of places, they have very good laws on the books. The laws are like, really protected coastal areas and you can't do this and you can't do that. But they're just completely ignored because there's so much corruption in the system. So it's really those two problems that you've got to address. One is like you've got to have decent laws and rules and regulations, number one, and two, they've got to be enforced, which then gets you into the whole area of corruption. Because like I say, I mean, most of the stuff that I saw in India, like that the Thane River where you saw those guys out, it's totally illegal. There's no question about it. It's very clear. There's no sand mining allowed on the river. But you can go out there just about any morning and there are hundreds and hundreds of boats digging up sand, broad daylight, no problem. So you have those two problems. My impression is, I think Northern Europe is kind of ahead of the game. Like I said, in France and Italy and a couple of other countries, they've completely banned river sand mining, which generally speaking is sort of the worst or has the most potential to do damage. So I think that's a pretty good move. But it's just a real piecemeal thing in this country and all across the world.
Yeah. Phew. Sand.
Who
Makes
knew?
the water issue look like easy. All right, where was my question? Yeah, the middle row and then row 3.
Hi, my name's Elizabeth Dietz. We're all from American University. And my question was, as young people who are beginning to think more about their environmental impact on a day-to-day basis, that's not necessarily related to science, but what would be your 3 biggest tips that you can implement into your everyday life to reduce your environmental impact?
Wow, what a great question. I should have an answer.
None of
ready
them
to-
have cars, so there's that,
Right,
right?
so-
Pink. Right?
Huh.
No, we don't.
No cars, yeah.
Geez, that's a really good question. Top 3. So I'm a big biker myself, so that's when I'm all for more bikes, fewer cars. I don't know, help me out, you guys. What?
Oh, microphone, sorry. We need a microphone here if she's going to answer. Sorry, it's a webcast. Unless you can shout really loudly. It's almost there. There we go.
I think one thing is in the United States, it's easier for us to say than it is, say, in China because they have a reverse argument. But consumerism, I mean, it drives me crazy that people run out to buy the latest cell phone. And you talk about the use of sand and other really getting very, very scarce minerals and materials in technology. The fact that we're changing TVs, we're changing phones. I think that idea of using technology and using of devices much longer is something that we should promote.
But also, it's funny because it's like because another topic that I'm starting to dive into here is like ocean plastics and just the question of plastic recycling and like, so our phone. So this has got some sand in it, right? But the challenge is like everything in my iPhone, that's my dog, sorry. Everything is recyclable, but how it was designed and made makes it very, very difficult to pull all these pieces out. I mean, tough too for the cement stuff. And so there's also the question for us to start thinking of as consumers, like what are we demanding from the products we use the most? I mean, should maybe a shout out to the Apples and whatever phones we use in the world about, these, because they will always say all components are recyclable, but it's not, you can't get it out. And so there's some of it is us as consumers to make the demands for better design, to make things recyclable, to make it a market. So that's mine. Okay, where else? Alec, you got a suggestion, don't you? Oh wait, what's his? Oh wait.
That's a good one.
What?
Yeah, having a vegetarian diet would be a good way to reduce probably one of the best to reduce your.
Or less meat,
Or less, yeah.
I mean, in some ways, what his book is saying. When I was reading the end, I'm like, oh, he's going that. Oh, everything. It's all everything less.
Yeah.
Everything less. I mean, and you have to kind of see how that meets in your world. But yeah, Oh, he's got something.
Oh, when Andrew Johnson was vice president, and for the first month that he was president after Lincoln was assassinated, he was living in a rooming house. That used to be standard. If you were unmarried, you lived in a rooming house. You didn't live in a McMansion. And if we just did that, and that's something millennials can do, that's one way to make America great again.
Yeah, I mean, smaller places, but
Rooming houses.
Well, one thing that your comment here about front, or someone made the comment about like the size of Chinese houses. I have to be honest, in China, I mean, it's not all like the rich, what is it, Crazy Rich Asian movie in Singapore. In China, people in general do not have huge places. I mean, there's a small. Well, but again, a majority of the people, what did you say, like 500 million people in China are living in cities. A lot of them here, my Chinese colleague here, a lot of people are living in rather, by American standards, a very modest size apartment, correct, Ja?
Yes.
How big's your parents' house?
How
many rooms?
Four, 5 rooms, yeah.
Okay, we have another, he's walking down to the mic.
Quick comment on the housing. The bigger problem in China is not the size of the house, but them building ghost cities with entire
the ghost cities,
giant numbers of apartment buildings that nobody's ever going to live in.
Well, some of them are starting to fill up. But yeah, that's true. We've screened some films here about these massive ghost cities it was kind of an investment thing. And now I'm looking at, because before we were looking at it as the carbon footprint, and we thought about the carbon footprint of the cement, but you have made me think about the sand. You've done it. Okay, we had some other, row 3 has been incredibly patient. She saw the mic moving away from her.
My name is Kay Oshel. I'm a retired federal government employee. I know there are a lot of specialized sands that are used in. Is there also a shortage with those? And for a second question, what are the subjects of your articles that are going to film and TV?
Oh,
thanks. This is a advertise everything Vince does day.
All right, love it. So yeah, there are lots of different kinds of sands that are used for specialty applications. Far as I know, there isn't really a problem of a shortage with any of those except for the. How to put this? There isn't. So the amounts that we use for things like silicon chips or for optical sands, or even stuff like golf courses, high-end golf courses that are really particular about their sand.
I forgot about that one.
Yeah. And racetracks, very, very choosy about their sand. But the amounts, so those sands are not very common, but also the amounts that we use are, in a global sense, they're really very small. So it's
even
not
the silicon, the silicon chips. Still compared to our roads and buildings.
Yeah, exactly. The real where it becomes a problem is just is the volume, right? The volume of construction sand that we use is just so massive that's where it becomes a problem, is when you take that much of anything out of the ground, you're going to cause some problems. So yeah, in a nutshell, I'll say not to worry about that too much. There's certain kinds of sands that have really rare elements in them, like rare earths and what they call iron sands, and these really super specialized things that you need for certain industrial applications. Those are really hard to find. They're very expensive. And we may run into shortages of some of those things. This is separate from just regular old quartz sand. This is really weirdo things like niobium and all these weird things you've never heard of, but that are really important. So we may run into problems with those down the road, but for now we're okay. They're just expensive. And really, you want to know about the movie thing?
All right, just briefly, tell us what it is.
So first of all, there's one production outfit that's trying to turn the ideas in this book into a TV series, like a dramatized TV series. And then the other thing is, has nothing to do with sand, but I went, I did a story about the world's greatest search and rescue team. All right, these are the guys who, when you hear, well, when there's the Haiti earthquake or the big earthquake in Nepal, and you hear about, well, the United States is sending their first responders over there. These are the guys
Whoa.
that they send, men and women, who are like, it's this crack team of like 70, 80 people who, whenever these big disasters hit, drop whatever they're doing, they rush out to an Air Force base, and within hours, they're at the disaster zone, digging through the rubble, pulling out survivors. So I rode along with those guys to the Nepal earthquake and wrote a story about that, and somebody's trying to make a movie out of it. Amazon is trying to make a movie out of it. So,
Wow. This guy's amazing. All right. Where are you going, Jill? Okay, there you go. There he is. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Ernest Newborn. To go off of Daniel's question a little bit, how is sand mining regulated among lakes and rivers that either share or cross international borders? And have there been notable disputes between countries on how much sand can be mined?
Yeah, because your title slide said something about war.
It did. I had some murders in there for you.
Okay. So is this part of an international thing? The Mekong, maybe?
Yeah, so there's no, as far as I know, there's no like international rules or regulations governing sand mining across borders. It's up to each country what they do within their own borders. It like along the Mekong, there's a lot of squabbling among all the different countries along the route because of more about dams. People are more concerned about dams at this point. And I think sand mining is only just starting to bubble up to the surface. I'm trying to think if I know of any instances of conflict over river sand mining. I can't think of anything about river sand mining off the top of my head, but I do know there have been, there's cases where, like China, for instance, has occasionally cut off. China sells construction sand to Taiwan, and they have occasionally cut it off, like as a diplomatic weapon. They're just like, we're not going to give you any more sand. Saudi Arabia, same thing. They sell construction sand to the smaller emirates around there, and they've done the same thing periodically. Just, we're not going to give you any more sand.
Okay. Well, one last question I want to ask you then, because I want to have time so you guys can buy the book and have him sign it. Back when you talk about the Emirates, when the giant palm tree island stuff, can you just, because I think, and even with the Spratlys, it's still kind of hard to get my brain around that because you always think when you make a sand, you pile sand up that it'll be washed away. How is it that they don't wash away?
Right. So
it's confusing.
You pile up a whole lot of sand. You surround it. So in Dubai, what they've done is they put a breakwater around it. They built up a big breakwater of rocks and sand. So that helps. And then there's a thing called vibrocompaction. Isn't that a great word? Which is basically, you take these huge metal spears, 100-foot tall metal things, and jab them down into the ground, and it just shakes everything up. So, like if you take, like if you've got a bag of chips and you shake it, all the chips kind of settle down. Same thing happens with sand, right? You shake it up.
Okay, that's just crazy. I read it, but it's like I needed to see the hands.
Yeah, you needed the hand. You needed
the
pen.
I need the pen. All right, you guys.
Anyway, that compacts it down, and you do that a few times, and you pile more sand, and then it gets more solid.
All right, so you're going to be around you're going to tell your story, I know, tonight at because we have to thank the Pulitzer Center for Crisis Reporting. They gave him the grant. Woohoo! We have a cheer for the Pulitzer Center.
Hey, Pulitzer Center.
That supports journalists doing crazy research like this. But also, are you going to go traveling overseas and giving any talks?
I hope so.
All right, good. I can book you up in China if you can get over there. So.
All right.
All right, well, good. But let's have applause for a man who wrote a book to get us all thinking differently. And
thanks.
I also, broadly, none of them were actually specifically for sand meetings, but I do have to thank in some ways, my Luce Foundation grant does focus on kind of more sustainable cities issues. So Luce Foundation, Climate Works, Energy Foundation, and the EPA, where, speaking of which, the EPA, you guys came for a sand meeting. So on the 20th, you ready for this? I'm going to have a meeting that we're going to talk about sludge, like sludge to energy. So looking at China about how basically waste gas and just issues of problems with wastewater and solid waste. Come on, you guys came to sand, you can come to the waste issues. So, all right, but if you're not on my mailing list, just talk to me afterwards, give us your card, and we'll put you on our mailing list. But thanks again. Yay, great book.
Thanks for coming, everybody.